My name is Denis. I'm actually out of the Sydney office. What I didn't say in the last talk, for those of you that stuck through with us, is I've been with Learnosity just shy of 7 years now. I happen to be one of the early developers on the API products that some of you know, and some of you will hopefully soon know.
Once again, my name is Morrison, and I'm a software engineer in our Sydney office. Now, while I work on things that are mostly behind the scenes, I have had my hand across a lot of the products that most of you would use. In particular, our audio offerings, which is our prime example of choice for illustrating how our products evolve along with the changing web.
So over the next half hour or so, we hope to take you through a little bit of the journey of Learnosity, in particular through the guise of the audio question itself, the ups and downs and the journey that has been on what has been a changing web and changing expectations from our clients as well. Many of you may not realize, I suspect almost no one in the room realizes that the audio offering was actually the first part of Learnosity's APIs. We actually started with a button, very much so, 2 buttons actually, if you want to be pedantic about it here. Back in 2011, Gavin actually got involved with one of the publishers in the sector, and we had the opportunity to solve what was a small but hard problem. The audio recording at scale across the globe, certainly not trivial from where we sat in Sydney at the time. We had a client that had an existing application and an existing market where they were recording in South America, in the US and elsewhere with large numbers to ESLs, English as a second language, and other learners. So we got stuck into trying to create a product around that, trying to create an opportunity and a platform. Learnosity had already been around for several years at that stage with different products in New South Wales, the Sydney state in Australia, and working with the state body there, delivering assessments 1, 2, 3, go for 80,000 at different times of the year, etc. But what we hadn't found was the right product that was going to challenge us to deliver something at scale globally. So we had hard problems, but not at scale. We had problems at scale, but weren't necessarily hard enough. This seemed to be, at the initial look at least, the right fit. And what I've actually got here is a live demo, so hopefully we're going to behave. Unfortunately, 6 years later, I do have to jump up there to the toolbar and play nice with Flash, please, Chrome, was that last click. But from here, I actually have what we had in 2011. So this look and feel is all HTML and JavaScript. Everything Learnosity built from the start in the API iteration was cloud-centric and open web-centric as well. The exception being that recording on the web at the time required you to lean on something that was closed source in Flash. We decided, based on that context, to hide it behind the scenes. So the only Flash that the user actually sees here is this Adobe privacy pop-up. So once I've allowed that, I'm actually able to record here very briefly. I'm just going to see, hopefully. We've got Denis of 2017 here, able to talk back to Denis of 2011. So this content would have been put together probably at about 12:30 a.m. my time, just before jumping on a New York call at 1 a.m. back then. These days we're a little more respectful of our team's time down under, and we've got great colleagues up in New York as well as Dublin that look after us. So yeah, that's the audio offering as it was in 2011. I'm going to hand over to Andrew here now to take us through, as this is the developer stream, a little more in depth as to how we put all that together.
All right, so a little bit of insight. So this is the early architecture, also known as how hard is it to put a button on a page anyway. The trick is, first and foremost, for a distributable solution, everything really needed to be light. So with respect to the client and their context, We needed our product to be small and unobtrusive for deployment's sake, but we also needed to be very, very mindful of the kind of network footprint that we'd have. So these lightweight ideals are all well and good when you have a generic web product, but we were dealing with voice recording, and for that, as Denis mentioned, we were dealing with Flash. So at the time, we were already leaning on Flash for our audio recording products because that was really all that was available to do it. And we weren't alone because this was the case for a lot of web applications that really needed to leverage interactable media. What that meant for us, though, was Flash was ubiquitous. It was basically an expected plugin for everybody to have. So in an architectural sense, that was actually quite handy because it meant that we could rely on the client to have this kind of thing in place. Going forward, Flash was something that would be leaning on again because that was all that was available. But because we're looking to solve this undifferentiated heavy lift of embedded media recording everywhere, we needed to think really light. So this is a quick look at our application footprint. Now, this approach should look very familiar to anybody who's ever tried to use any one of our APIs. And the reason being is because it hasn't really changed ever since we first started. Everything that handles the rendering, the interaction, the assessment workflow, modeling the questions and the interactable behaviors there are all just HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Now, in regards to keeping this nice and light, it's already deployably light, but in terms of the network footprint for this, we tried to keep that payload itself as skinny as possible. Now, if any of you turned up to Owen and Mark's talk earlier about performance, then they went into a lot more detail than I'm going to about how they went about doing that for this. However, for the Flash sake, what we decided to do was stick to a headless singleton Flash recorder and keep it behind the scenes such that all the interaction, as Denis mentioned, was handled by all this open web tech. And this was just relegated to this tiny no-frills package that handled all the grunt work. And it was no frills. It weighed in at about 30 kilobytes because that's all it did. It had no page prominence at all, and it did the job really nicely. But from here, we then needed to consider the network footprint. So one of the key questions we had to ask was, when we're capturing audio, can we stream that audio data directly to a server somewhere? Because that's kind of what Flash was famous for back in the day, all that media streaming stuff. Now, while that may be the case, it's something that we couldn't do, and there's a couple of good reasons why we couldn't. The first was network reliability. So we were looking at this worldwide solution, and that meant we'd have to deal with network instability somewhere along the line. So let's say you have a user in a high-stakes assessment, they're in the middle of streaming or recording up for an assessment, the stream drops, that's potentially catastrophic. And while we didn't expect it to happen all the time, it's still something that we really needed to consider. Secondly was the realistic considerations of deploying on the broader web, particularly in things like classrooms and in institutions, where we wouldn't necessarily have the required firewall setups, open ports for streaming, things like that. And so we didn't really want to complicate any deployment requirements that our clients would need to set up before using us, because that's just not an ideal solution. So that's why we originally architected the recorder to chunk the audio. So what that meant was we established the recording in memory, and then small packages of it could be sent up to the server bit by bit, as the recording was being recorded, and even after, depending on the available bandwidth. And that meant that we could work around network instability because everything was in memory, and we could effectively retry any piece of the puzzle along the way. And that meant it also meant that we were playing nice with network availability in general. But we didn't stop there, because another detail we paid attention to was the data requirements of a recording. So we really considered things like the fact that sample rate requirements for a voice recording are much less than sample rate requirements for any other kind of recording like music. So being able to kind of start slashing that down and removing unnecessary data, we're really minimizing the network footprint that we're requiring our users to send up to the server. On a similar note, we looked at audio compression along the way. We ended up using and still use ULAW encoding, which is very good for the kind of voice level signal transfer, because while it is a lossy compression system, the losses that we get from the data in order to keep that package nice and small are the kind of frequencies that, once again, for voice, we're okay with disregarding. And finally, because now that we're recording to memory, things like audio playback from a stream, it's kind of difficult, kind of waiting for the stream to finish establishing itself somewhere to gather. But when your recording's in memory, you can start playing it back instantly, and you take the requirement off the server for requesting that data back. So, what did we need to do for the server footprint? Because we're dealing with lots and lots of small chunks of data, with the expectation of the end user to some point put it all together again in a recording, we really had to consider a depthful approach to setting up our server setup. So what that meant was our server disregarded what it was collecting at the time. It sent it straight up to a cloud-based storage somewhere, and then delegated the job of putting it back together somewhere else along the line. What this meant was these servers would remain more and more available as more users were uploading recordings. At the same time, one of the similar things we do elsewhere, such as in scoring, once we've confirmed that we've actually collected all the data we need, whether or not it's actually put together again, we can actually confirm that at an assessment level, what's been submitted has arrived at its destination safely, and we're no longer interrupting an assessment level event. So once again, as more and more chunks are now hitting our server, we had a whole team of back office processes picking up from the pre-processed storage and putting it all together. And pardon me, what this meant, what our server footprint meant for the whole is that what kept things running smoothly at the source, at the assessment level, was just generally this depthful approach, this high availability at the server level. And with that, we actually had a functional audio recording question available for educational use within our brand new API, Questions API.
Thanks, Andrew. And as we moved beyond 2011 into 2012, we rolled in more features, more functionality, but it's worth stopping for a moment and just mentioning what Andrew took us through there was the audio question, but the jobs behavior, and for those of you that have had fun on AWS and asynchronicity in the last couple of years, either through use of our own services or your own architecture, will know that that is what so much of Learnosity's offering is based on. Where we had the audio stitching service there, we moved on to having the session submission and synchronization service work in a similar asynchronous pattern. Those architectures that we took on early to deliver that problem and create that platform in AWS were what inspired us to continue delivering the rest of the infrastructure, the features, and the services that we have today. Several slides got stolen from this deck and better presented in the keynote, so I'm doing the opposite here. I really liked this quote, and when I look back, it really is what we were focused on and what we were doing in those early stages with all the different problems that came our way. Everything we were challenging ourselves to do was ensure that we were creating reusable components, reusable widgets or features that we knew would go further than one given client's request, big or small. We wanted to know, even though we were down in the little dungeon in Australia, that we were going to have an impact on the world with our products. I was very lucky myself at that stage to get direct access to our clients and have the time and opportunity to work with and speak to so many of you as I look around the room. That's less of an option today as we've scaled those teams beyond 50 down under, but our technical support team and others really cover us and do a great job in presenting our products better than we can actually do ourselves. Given a few minutes ago during the Q&A on the analytics, I had to keep deflecting I don't know how many different questions because the products are so broad at this stage that I really do struggle to get full coverage myself. As I said, as we went into 2012, we really knew that the embedded approach was one of the key things in the architecture. While Andrew's last slide talked to the server side, his slide before that talked to the footprint and behavior we had on the browser. And our respect and endeavor to ensure quality went into your host pages was resulting in validation of the embedded approach. It certainly felt like a mixed liability at the early stage where I'd scramble to fix my dodgy CSS here and there after going live in somebody's beta project. I'd get up nice and early to get the release out, etc. But quickly we got into a pattern of successful defensive namespacing, defensive programming at styling and at JavaScript levels, such that we struck the right balance. We wanted our client developers and our client product owners to have confidence that they could customize and they could really own what we stuck into their environments and have confidence that it worked out of the box. I really enjoyed some of the sessions downstairs this morning hearing about our clients' work from an out-of-the-box stage through to a fully customized. That didn't come for free in 2012. It was hard work, but today we have process and we have great QA teams and great developers, tech leads and others that focus on these things as their daily bread and butter. The other side of things, near the end of 2013, was validation on the number side of things. We had gone in about 15 months or less from 0 users to seeing in excess of 250,000 users on the API. So at that stage, we thought we were flying high, but as we know from some of the numbers a little earlier, it was only a sign of things to come.
So basically, as Learnosity continued to grow and our intent changed, and we started heading off in this direction of innovation towards this level of platform that we were building, our early culture encouraged things like hack days, and these were days where we'd group up and look at kind of what new technology we could experiment with, what interesting technology specification can we look at. Some of the kind of side effect, the assessment level results of these hack days have been things like more customizable assessments, extra accessibility features. But in regards to our long-running example here with the audio question, we ended up with a proof of concept that started dealing with the WebRTC specification. So for this particular hack day in 2013, there were 2 key specifications that we were keeping an eye on. One was the WebRTC API specification, which dealt with real-time communication technologies. So basically, being able to access media streams much like Flash could, but with a JavaScript interface. The other was the Web Audio API, which was the ability to take those streams and start processing on it, much like we did with Flash, in order to chunk it, deal with the sample rate, and all the niceties that we'd established with our original architecture. Now, even though this hack day occurred in 2013, we're actually looking at this kind of stuff as early as 2011, basically when we started heading in this direction of our products. And that's strictly because we really wanted to have our products across as many web platforms that we could get them across. If you remember back in 2011, there was the big controversy about Flash not being allowed on iPhone. Similarly, Flash then blocked other mobile platforms like Android. So this was something that we were really keen at experimenting with. So why we ended up looking at it in 2013 was, up until that point, it was vastly experimental. So around about mid-2013 was when the specification, the implementation of it was improving. So we knew that Chrome 29 for desktop was implementing these specs quite well, probably in a state where we could actively start using it. But it was around about that time that the other browsers started catching up. So the latest Firefox Nightly at the time also started implementing it properly, and even the Chrome beta for Androids started implementing it as well. So what that would mean for us at that time was the audio recording question on mobile devices, which would be a big win. So here we actually have the artifact left behind by the 2013 hack team. As you can see, they went through a lot of effort to get a lot of our core functionality tested. And we even end up with this no-frills audio recorder. Which to this day, even though this was an experiment back in 2013, still works. So big plus for the way the technology has continued to move forward. Now, the results at the time were, yes, what we'd assumed that the latest Chrome worked was correct. Yep, the Firefox Nightly was kind of halfway there. Same thing with the Chrome for Android betas. They weren't returning any data. And so this was something that we were, yes, still interested in, but would have to put a pin in. So this was actually a very promising experiment. And the reason it makes our timeline is because this was kind of a big pivotal point in starting to move towards a flashless audio recording question. Now, the good thing about these specs is that as times change with the web, so does the web, which meant that these particular web APIs for audio started falling in place for in-use browsers. So this would have been around about 2014. The in-use Firefox, no longer the Nightly, latest Chrome, even Opera, Chrome for Android, started implementing these specs in a really usable way. So what did we do? We actually built our own beta version of the audio recording question within our API. So we actually successfully mirrored all that core functionality that you saw within the questions API. The unfortunate aspect was, given the way the APIs themselves worked, being able to access a media stream with a JavaScript interface meant we were piping that stream into the main JavaScript thread when we wanted to work on it, and that was less than ideal. So it was ultimately less performant than Flash at the time. So what impact did that have on the audio question? Everything that existed at the time continued to work as normal, and that's been typical of our journey, particularly with the audio question. But we did have a beta JavaScript-only recorder, and that was now available for Chrome and Firefox for mobile, but also it existed as an alternative for anyone who wanted to use it behind a beta flag at the time. Now, Denis touched on how our products had grown at the time. One of the key things of note here is that the client.js relationship now is buffered by an audio API ever since we started introducing things like the audio playback feature. This represents the fact that in as much as we try to be Lego blocks for our clients to use, a lot of the way we build our product is like Lego blocks for ourselves with modularity. So this new recorder was effectively just plug and play, and being able to differentiate between, hey, I want to use the Flash recorder, hey, I want to use the WebRTC recorder, was just a simple flip of the switch. Flitch, there we go. So as of 2014, we had an in-product beta of our WebRTC recorder. So once again, the web continued to change. In late 2014, the Web Audio API specification introduced audio workers. Now, we paid attention to a few of the extra changes that were happening within this spec. This one would have been a big win. The reason being is this promised to keep the media stream off in its own thread, much like the way Flash processes media streams it collects. We could actually process this away from the main JavaScript thread, and the WebRTC recorder could be as performant as Flash. So what we did was, in early 2015, even though even today there's still no browser implementing this particular part of the spec, we did this big sweeping change of our audio API to deal with this. We actually re-architected the entire audio API to leverage future performance improvements. And the reason is, the writing was kind of on the wall at this point. We saw the ability to replace proprietary technology with open web technology. And so as a result, we were keen to jump on that whenever it arose. So the impact on the audio question was absolutely none. Even though we did do an entire refactor of our audio API, what was available still continues to work. And once again, this is kind of a key point that we continue to make about our products. So this one's a little bit more recent, as it hit at the end of last year. Mid last year, Chrome announced plans to block Flash by default. Now you would have noticed Denis having to fiddle with that very tiny little plugin in the URI bar. It's not entirely intuitive. We don't know why that is, but it hit in December of last year. So what we did was not a lot. We already had an alternative to Flash. As of 2015, we started re-architecting our entire audio API just to get ready to be able to replace Flash. And now Chrome was starting to put the writing on the wall there. So the impact on the audio question was that it still worked. The switch happened just before the Chrome blocker rolled out. And so as of December of last year, everyone's been using, at least for Chrome, Firefox, etc., everyone's been using the WebRTC recorder. So from a proof of concept to a beta to now a first-class citizen, that's kind of the story of how we grew out the WebRTC audio recorder.
Thanks, Andrew. And while we were talking through the web audio, so many other things were changing on the web. Learnosity is roughly 10 years old this year. So is the iPhone. And on that 7-year journey, or 6 years for the APIs or so, so much has changed as well. Not alone did we go from Flash to native web recording on audio, but we went from, thankfully, never starting with IE6 or 7, but IE8 in our case, to a world of evergreen browsers. We did retire IE8 last year, at the start of 2016, but because of our success, we're a conflict in some ways, where IE8 was one of the last things we got rid of compared to others out there in the market, other products. But we're also on the bleeding edge with service workers and future changes in the audio spec. As a mature product, we're keeping an eye on both sides. The stability for yourselves as our clients and the end users that get access to the APIs, but also we want to know that we're going to have the new shiny for the sake of enjoyment and career satisfaction down under, as well as hopefully to ensure that you guys have the best products to build on top of and the best functionality. Other things that we're really focused on in the coming year, or the latter half of this year, is progression from jQuery to React, where we started out on lightweight frameworks like Backbone, etc. We've kept an eye on other trends in the market like Angular, etc., but we've known that there wasn't quite the right fit, and now we're already beginning our change to React. If you dig under the hood, you might find that some of the question types are actually rendering using the framework, and those changes, like it happened with audio, won't necessarily be visible. They're to the benefit of everyone, but they're happening unbeknownst to most. Touch wood. Learnosity is focused on more than just audio and more than just service workers and more than just React, though. We're also, as you'll have seen from the accessibility talk, very aware of many other domains for end users. We're also very aware of mobile. Anything that is on the web, we want to know that we're doing the best practice or we're going above it. We continue to ensure that we're delivering to that bar and focused on the quality of the technology that we deliver. From that effort, we've been very lucky to have the success that we've had. So we showed in 2011, we released our first audio question, and I think the number got stolen me from the keynote, but 2 million audio recordings a month was something we only actually found out when we were putting this presentation together. So we do see huge traffic, but we don't necessarily break it down by question type. So it really was gratifying and impressive to see such a huge number from so many different clients using one particular question type, of which I know it's an advanced use case. From seeing all the different engagements through the years, it's 1 in 5 would actually be in some way making use of audio recordings on the web. So that's a really large number of use. But not alone have we had growth of use, we've had our teams go from 7 or 8 when we were first delivering that first API to 75 today across 4 offices. We've also seen a large growth in the authoring efforts, where to complement the questions API and other tools, we now have a rich offering. Across the authoring side of things as well as analytics. It's not just assessments within our tools. The 24 million users is also indicative of the depth of those services as well. That the audio is one part with 2 million recordings, but we also have engagement across all those different services, to the point now that we've gone from 250,000 users back in 2013, as I showed, to 24 million today. And we hope to continue to see that growth because we know it's your success. Your success as developers getting to market quickly, your success as product owners and product managers delivering the features that might have been just out of reach. Okay. Again, just a little indication of going from the questions API in 2011 to many services, not all of which are actually listed here. We continue to grow and we continue to work with your needs. Be it as developers, product owners, or elsewhere in your organization, it's when you bring your problems to us that we add to this, this set of tools. So as we said, it's been an interesting couple of years. We've continued to grow and we really hope to be showing another version of this timeline with more of your success and more tools and functionality next year and for years after.
Alrighty, this is just a brief speak to the fact that evolution doesn't actually stop. So we're coming back to our audio question example here. These are the changes that we're currently keeping an eye on this year and beyond. I did mention the audio workers being a big boon for us in being able to shed off proprietary web technologies for open web technologies when they finally hit. At the same time, January of this year, Apple, they pushed the WebRTC API spec into the Open WebKit project. And even though it hasn't been announced, it's kind of potentially indicative that Safari is going to pick this up soon as well, which would then lead on to Safari for mobile. And that means an even broader platform for our feather in the cap audio recording question.
And finally, I hope from the talk that it's reasonably apparent that Andrew's your audio expert. For anyone that hasn't already been working with it and wants to, he'd love to field all the questions and the support tickets. Beyond that, I hope it's evident that Learnosity is your assessment expert as well. As a platform, as a toolkit, whatever it needs to be in your given environment. The Lego blocks that Andrew referred to, you can mix and match to leverage what you need and what you don't need. Overall, though, we know we're going to continue focusing on the technology and getting that right. And the new features and the new focuses really come from you. So I hope you'll continue to work with us and help us evolve the products. Thank you.